Reborn with my dragon. The Dragon Rider Guild was a place of legends, where the bond between rider and dragon forged the kingdom's mightiest warriors. Each rider was entrusted with a dragon egg at their initiation, a sacred ritual that revealed their destined partner. The dragon, upon hatching, would reflect the rider's soul. When I was given my egg, I could feel the unease in the room. It wasn't just the shimmering, opalescent surface of the egg that drew stares. It was me. "She's not one of us," someone muttered. "She doesn't belong here," another agreed. They weren't wrong. I wasn't of noble blood, nor did I grow up in the cities like most recruits. I was a girl from the wilds, orphaned and strange, with a knack for understanding creatures others feared. The guild had accepted me reluctantly, and only because my affinity for magic was too strong to ignore. Most of the recruits treated me with disdain, whispering about my shabby appearance and lack of refinement. Some outright mocked me, their taunts following me through the halls, but not everyone sneered. One recruit, a handsome dragon warrior with striking green eyes and a quiet confidence, often glanced my way. His looks were sharp yet brooding, as if his presence held secrets as deep as his piercing gaze. He never joined in the ridicule, though he never spoke to me either. His gaze lingered, dark and intense, just long enough to leave me unsettled yet curious. When his eyes met mine, it felt as though the world slowed, and his expression softened for the briefest moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his stare. A challenge, perhaps, or an unspoken understanding. It was as though he saw something in me, something raw and untamed that mirrored a part of himself. My childhood had been a series of battles. I had no memory of my parents, only of the forest that became my home and the creatures that became my family. While other children were learning swordplay or courtly manners, I was learning to survive. I befriended wolves and spoke with birds, but humans? They were cruel and distant, treating me as an outcast whenever I ventured into their villages for food or supplies. "Stay away from her," mothers would warn their children. "She's cursed." The scars on my arms bore testament to the fights I had to endure. When other children bullied me, I fought back, earning a reputation for being wild and untamed, but no amount of scrapes or bruises could extinguish the fire within me. I survived because I had no other choice. When the Dragon Rider Guild sent scouts to search for potential recruits, they found me by chance. A village elder had reported the wild girl with the glowing eyes to them, and they came to investigate. I still remember the way their leader, a grizzled man named Garrett, looked at me when I faced down one of his men who tried to intimidate me. "She's got spirit," he'd said, his expression thoughtful. "And magic. The guild might make something of her." It wasn't an invitation. It was a challenge. I'd accepted because deep down, I wanted more than survival. I wanted a place where I belonged. When I arrived at the guild, I realized how much harder I'd have to fight. The recruits were from noble families, their confidence and training evident in the way they carried themselves. I was an outsider, rough and raw, with no fancy lineage to bolster my presence. They whispered behind my back, laughed at my mistakes, and made sure I knew I was unwelcome. But I refused to give up. I spent long nights in the training grounds, practicing until my muscles ached and my magic left me drained. I studied the texts in the library, absorbing every scrap of knowledge about dragons and their riders. When the others sneered at me, I stared them down, refusing to let their scorn break me. Despite the hostility, there were encounters that lingered in my mind. During a particularly grueling training session, I had stumbled, exhaustion and frustration threatening to overwhelm me. As I knelt trying to catch my breath, a shadow fell over me. Looking up, I saw the green-eyed warrior. He didn't say a word, but his gaze held mine, steady, intense, and unreadable. Then, without a word, he extended his hand to help me up. I hesitated, unsure of his intentions, but the sincerity in his eyes left no room for doubt. I took his hand, his grip firm yet gentle, and he pulled me to my feet. "Don't let them see you falter," he said quietly, his voice low and steady. It wasn't a command, but an encouragement that stayed with me long after he walked away. In the library, I often found myself drawn to the same quiet corners where he sat, reading tomes on advanced dragon lore. We never spoke in those moments, but his presence was a constant. Sometimes I would catch him watching me, his gaze shadowed by thoughts I couldn't decipher. When our eyes met, it was as though the rest of the room faded, leaving only the weight of unspoken words between us. I would quickly look away, my heart racing, but his image lingered in my mind long after. Even when I earned my place in the initiation ceremony, the whispers continued, but so did his silent, watchful presence, and it became a small, secret comfort in a world that felt determined to break me. The night my egg hatched, the world seemed to hold its breath. I sat alone in my chamber, too nervous to join the others. The egg cracked slowly, each fracture releasing a pulse of light that filled the room. When the shell finally gave way, a wave of energy swept over me, bringing me to my knees. From the remnants of the shell, a creature emerged. A dragon unlike any I'd ever read about. She was massive even as a hatchling, her scales an iridescent cascade of gold, silver, and black. Her wings were lined with veins of glowing light, and when she spread them, they filled the room with a soft, otherworldly radiance. Her eyes were deep pools of molten amber, staring into mine as if she already knew me. I reached out, trembling, and she pressed her head into my hand. At her touch, something ancient stirred within me, a memory I couldn't place. "You're incredible," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. She tilted her head, then let out a roar that shook the walls. It wasn't the high-pitched chirp of a newborn dragon. It was a sound of power, raw and untamed. When I brought her to the Hall of Bonding, the room fell into stunned silence. The other dragons, no matter how majestic, seemed ordinary in her presence. She towered over them, her scales shimmering with an inner light that made her look like she'd stepped out of a dream. Her wings, stretched wide, cast faint patterns of golden light on the walls, and the air seemed charged with her presence. "That's her dragon?" one boy whispered, his voice tinged with awe. "She can't be real," said another, disbelief mingling with envy. I could feel their stares shifting from Celestia to me, the whispers growing louder. Even as their awe turned into skepticism, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. The green-eyed warrior stood among the recruits, his expression unreadable, but his gaze was fixed on me. Unlike the others, he didn't whisper or scoff. His eyes softened slightly as they met mine, and for a brief moment, it felt as though he understood something the others did not. Then he did something unexpected. As the Grandmaster's voice boomed, commanding attention, his gaze lingered, deliberate and unwavering. When the crowd began to disperse, he approached me, his steps silent yet purposeful. Standing just close enough for his voice to reach me without drawing attention, he leaned in slightly, his green eyes blazing with a mixture of intensity and something else, something darker yet unspoken. "They see your strength," he murmured, his voice low and edged with something like admiration. "Even if they don't want to admit it, keep going." Before I could respond, he stepped back, his usual stoic expression returning as he melted into the crowd. My heart raced, his words replaying in my mind. The quiet strength in his voice, the unspoken encouragement, and the way his gaze seemed to pierce through every doubt I had ever carried. It was both unsettling and magnetic. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that he saw something in me no one else did, something that scared me as much as it thrilled me. The Grand Master, a stern man who rarely showed emotion, stepped forward. His eyes widened as he studied her. "Impossible," he murmured. I frowned. "What's impossible?" He shook his head, but his gaze didn't leave her. "We'll see." The trials began soon after. My dragon, whom I had named Celestia, was a force of nature. She didn't just fly, she soared, faster and higher than any other dragon, cutting through the skies with a precision that left onlookers speechless. Her fire wasn't a simple blaze. It was a storm of golden flames that turned stone to molten lava, swirling and shaping into patterns that seemed almost deliberate. When we faced shadow beasts in the cursed forest, she didn't hesitate. Her roar shattered the darkness itself, driving the creatures into nothingness. Her claws could cut through the hardest stone, and her wings generated gusts strong enough to topple entire trees. In the water trials, she dove with elegance, her dark scales blending into the depths as her glow illuminated the path ahead, outmaneuvering aquatic predators with ease. During the endurance trials, Celestia demonstrated unmatched stamina, flying for hours without faltering, while other dragons had to rest. When challenged to navigate a labyrinth filled with shifting magical traps, her sharp instincts and unshakable focus allowed us to emerge unscathed. As we progressed through the trials, I noticed the whispers about us growing louder. The recruits who had mocked me were now silenced, their disdain replaced with curiosity and envy. Celestia's effortless dominance in each trial seemed to unnerve them, as though they were witnessing something beyond their understanding. Among the crowd, the green-eyed warrior continued to watch us. His gaze was intense, but there was something else in his expression, a mixture of admiration and intrigue that made my heart race. "Who is she?" the other recruits whispered, their voices laced with both fear and awe. Even I began to wonder. Celestia was more than a dragon. She was powerful in a way that felt ancient, familiar. The truth came during the final trial. The Grandmaster had arranged a mock battle against veteran riders to test our mettle. Celestia and I were last to enter the arena, and as we stepped forward, the world seemed to still. The veterans' dragons, a mix of formidable beasts, growled and hissed, their claws scraping against the stone floor. Celestia, however, was calm. She spread her wings, her glowing presence enough to send ripples of unease through the crowd. When the battle began, she didn't fight like the others. She didn't rely on brute strength or speed. Instead, she moved with precision and grace, as if she'd done this 1,000 times before. Fire clashed with fire, but her golden flames swallowed them whole. Then, as one veteran dragon lunged for her, a burst of light erupted from her chest. The arena filled with a radiant glow, and when it cleared, the opposing dragons had all been forced to bow, their riders stunned. The Grandmaster rose to his feet, his face pale. "Enough!" he bellowed. Celestia landed beside me, her tail curling protectively around my legs. I could feel her power thrumming through the air. "What's going on?" I demanded, turning to the Grandmaster. "What aren't you telling me?" He hesitated, then spoke, his voice heavy with reverence. "She is not an ordinary dragon. She is Dracena Celestialis, the lost princess of the Dragonkin, the heir to the dragon throne." My heart stopped. What? "The Dragonkin were wiped out in the Great War centuries ago," he continued, "their royal line thought extinct. But your bond with her, it proves otherwise. You are her rider, and perhaps her equal." The revelation changed everything. Celestia wasn't just my dragon, she was a queen, and by extension I was no longer just a misfit. The weight of the Grandmaster's words struck me like a thunderbolt. My head spun, and my vision blurred as my knees buckled beneath me. The last thing I saw was Celestia's glowing form looming protectively over me, her molten amber eyes narrowing as she let out a furious roar. The crowd erupted in chaos. Celestia's anger was palpable, her tail whipping the air and her wings flaring to their full expanse. Flames licked the edges of her mouth as she bared her teeth, daring anyone to come near me. The other dragons recoiled, and even their riders stumbled back in fear. The Grandmaster shouted commands, but it was clear no one could control her. No one but me, and I was slipping into unconsciousness. Through the haze, I heard a calm, firm voice. "Easy, girl, she needs help." It was the green-eyed warrior. Slowly he stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. Celestia's growl deepened, her molten gaze locking onto him, but he didn't waver. "She's safe with me. You know that," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "Let me help her." For a moment I thought Celestia might attack him, but then she let out a low rumble and stepped aside, her tail curling protectively around me. The warrior knelt at my side, his strong arms lifting me effortlessly. As he carried me toward the training grounds infirmary, I could feel his heartbeat steady and sure against my back. Celestia followed closely, her every movement tense and alert, her eyes scanning for threats. By the time we reached the infirmary, the commotion had died down, though I could still feel the weight of the recruits' stares. The green-eyed warrior gently laid me on a cot, his gaze lingering on me for a moment before he stepped back to let the healers work. Celestia positioned herself at the entrance, her massive form blocking anyone from entering without permission. "She'll be all right," the warrior said softly, more to himself than anyone else, but his words seemed to ease Celestia. She let out a soft huff, her tail relaxing slightly as she settled into a protective vigil. When I finally awoke, the green-eyed warrior was still there, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. His piercing gaze met mine, and he gave a small, reassuring nod. "You're tougher than you look," he said with a faint smile, "but I think you already knew that." The room was quiet, but the air was heavy with unspoken questions. Celestia stirred, lifting her head to nuzzle my shoulder, her warmth grounding me. Whatever came next, I knew I wouldn't face it alone.